I stood at the marble kitchen island, watching the afternoon light filter through the floor-to-ceiling windows of our home, and tried to prepare myself for what was coming. In 30 minutes, Emily would arrive with her parents, my husband's brother and sister-in-law, the Carters, for what they'd called a family discussion. I knew exactly what that meant. It meant another opportunity for them to remind me of my place, to make sure I understood that I was the outsider, the one without credentials, the woman who'd somehow tricked her way into their family's circle. My daughter Sophie appeared in the doorway, her expression tight with anger. She'd overheard the phone call yesterday, heard Mrs. Carter's sugary voice dripping with condescension as she'd suggested that perhaps I might want to sit this one out, since the conversation would involve complex educational matters regarding Emily's future. "Mum, you don't have to take this," Sophie said, crossing the room to stand beside me. "Every single time they come here, they treat you like you're invisible, or worse, like you're some kind of charity case Dad took pity on." I reached out and squeezed her hand. At 22, Sophie had inherited her father's sharp business sense and my tendency to see through people's facades. She'd been defending me against her cousin's cutting remarks since they were both teenagers, and I loved her fiercely for it, even as I wished she didn't have to. "I know, sweetheart, but they're family." "Family doesn't act like that." She shook her head, her dark hair swinging. "Emily's gotten worse since she got into Whitman. Every time she comes home, she finds new ways to remind everyone that she's at some prestigious university and you never finished your degree. And her parents just smile and nod like she's saying something profound instead of being cruel." The doorbell rang, cutting off my response. David emerged from his study, straightening his tie. My husband caught my eye across the room, and I saw the apology there. He knew what these visits cost me. He'd witnessed countless dinner parties where his brother and sister-in-law had steered conversations toward their daughter's academic achievements while carefully avoiding any mention of my contributions to our family. He'd sat through Emily's pointed comments about the importance of formal education and proper credentials. What none of them knew, what I'd kept carefully hidden for 5 years, was that their perfect, prestigious family would have collapsed entirely if not for the woman they loved to dismiss. David opened the door and the Carters swept in like they owned the place. Mrs. Carter, perfectly coiffed in designer clothes, air-kissed my husband's cheeks while barely glancing in my direction. Mr. Carter, silver-haired and pompous, clapped his brother on the shoulder and launched immediately into talk about market trends and investment opportunities, speaking as if I weren't standing 10 feet away. Emily trailed behind them, her Whitman University tote bag slung over one shoulder, her expression carrying that particular blend of boredom and superiority that I'd watched develop over the past 2 years. She gave Sophie a brief nod, ignored me entirely, and settled onto the leather sofa, like a queen taking her throne. "So," Mrs. Carter said, accepting the coffee David offered while waving away the cup he'd poured for me, "we wanted to discuss Emily's upcoming internship opportunity. There's a position at Morrison and Associates. You know, the premier financial consulting firm. But it requires family connections and, well, significant financial backing." She looked meaningfully at David, then let her gaze slide past me as if I were part of the furniture. "The thing is," Mr. Carter continued, leaning forward with his elbows on his knees, "Emily needs someone who understands the complexity of these elite professional environments. Someone who can speak the language, if you will. Navigate the nuances." The implication hung in the air like smoke. Someone educated. Someone with credentials. Someone who wasn't me. Emily finally spoke, her voice carrying that cultivated tone she'd developed since starting at Whitman. "I mean, no offense, Aunt Lisa, but this isn't really something you'd understand. These firms want people who've been groomed for success from the beginning. They want academic pedigree, internship experience, the right connections. It's not like you can just teach yourself into these positions." Sophie stood abruptly, her hands clenched at her sides. "That's enough, Emily." "What?" Emily blinked with false innocence. "I'm just being realistic. Aunt Lisa dropped out of community college, didn't she? She's never worked in a professional environment. How could she possibly advise me on securing a position at Morrison and Associates? Mrs. Carter smiled indulgently at her daughter, then turned to me with that expression I'd come to recognize, pity mixed with disdain, wrapped in a thin veneer of politeness. Lisa, dear, we certainly appreciate everything you do around the house. You keep such a lovely home. But Emily's future requires a certain level of expertise that's, well, beyond your experience. I felt Sophie move toward Emily, her body rigid with fury, but I caught her arm gently. 25 years of holding my tongue, of letting these people underestimate me, of playing the role they'd assigned me, all of it crystallized in this moment into something hard and bright and unbreakable. Actually, I said, my voice calm and steady, I'd be happy to help Emily with her application to Morrison and Associates. The room went silent. Emily actually laughed, a short, sharp sound of disbelief. You? Help me? She exchanged a glance with her mother. With all due respect, what could you possibly know about financial consulting? You've never even held a real job. I set down my untouched coffee and folded my hands in my lap. David had gone very still beside me. He knew. God, he knew what was coming, and I could see him bracing himself. You're right that I never finished my degree, I said. I left school when I was 21 to take care of my dying mother. Funny thing about life or death situations, they teach you to prioritize. And after she passed, I discovered I had a talent for learning things on my own, languages for instance. I taught myself Mandarin, Japanese and German. Financial modeling, international tax law, portfolio management. Mrs. Carter's smile had frozen on her face. That's very industrious, Lisa. But there's a difference between reading a few books and actually... I continued, my tone still pleasant, still measured, happen to hold advanced certifications in financial analysis that I earned through independent study and examination. Not that anyone ever asked. Emily leaned back, crossing her arms. Even if that's true, certifications aren't the same as real-world experience. You're absolutely right. I turned to look at her directly, meeting those dismissive eyes with my own steady gaze. So let me tell you about some real-world experience. 6 years ago, your Uncle David's company was hemorrhaging money. A deal in Shanghai had gone catastrophically wrong due to translation errors in the contracts and a fundamental misunderstanding of local financial regulations. The company was weeks away from bankruptcy. David cleared his throat. Lisa, no, I said gently. They want to know about experience. Let me tell them. I looked back at the Carters, who were now sitting very straight, very alert. David was too proud to tell anyone in the family what was happening, especially his older brother, who'd always been so successful, whose business never stumbled. So he told you all that everything was fine while he was actually drowning. I don't see what this has to do with, Mr. Carter began, but I spoke over him, something I'd never done before. I found out by accident. I saw the documents he'd hidden, the letters from creditors, the final notices, and, instead of panicking, I spent 3 days locked in his office, translating every word of those Shanghai contracts, identifying exactly where the miscommunication had occurred. Then I used my self-taught knowledge of international tax law to restructure the entire deal, my understanding of Chinese business culture to renegotiate the terms, and my financial modeling skills to create a recovery plan that saved everything. The silence in the room had changed quality. It was no longer dismissive. It was shocked. David's company didn't just survive, I continued. It thrived. The restructured Shanghai deal became our most profitable venture. I then quietly took over management of our entire investment portfolio, using strategies I'd learned through years of independent study. Over the past 6 years, I've increased our family's net worth by 400%. Emily's face had gone pale. Uncle David never mentioned... No, David said quietly. I didn't. Because your aunt asked me not to. She said she didn't need credit. She didn't need recognition. She just wanted to help. I turned to face Mrs. Carter directly. Remember 5 years ago when you called David, panicking because Emily had applied to 7 universities and been rejected by all of them? When you were terrified she'd end up at a state school instead of somewhere prestigious? Mrs. Carter's hand went to her throat. Her eyes had gone wide. You asked David for help, and David asked me. So I spent 2 weeks researching Whitman University's admission requirements, studying their acceptance patterns, analysing what they valued in candidates. I rewrote Emily's application essay. I coached her through the supplementary questions. I used connections I'd built in the education sector. Yes, connections. Emily, because even self-taught people can build professional networks, to ensure her application landed on the right desk at the right time. Emily stood up, her tote bag sliding off her shoulder. That's not true. I got into Whitman on my own merit. Your grades were good, I acknowledged, but they weren't exceptional. Your test scores were solid but not outstanding. You had potential, but your application materials didn't showcase it effectively. The essay you'd originally written focused on a volunteer trip to Costa Rica that, frankly, read like every other privileged teenager's poverty tourism narrative. I helped you reframe it to emphasize leadership and genuine cultural exchange. I made sure you sounded like someone Whitman would want. Sophie had sat back down, her expression somewhere between vindication and astonishment. She'd known I was smart, known I'd helped her father, but even she hadn't known the full extent of it. Mr. Carter found his voice, though it came out strained. Even if all of that is true, and I'm not saying I believe it, that doesn't explain how you could possibly help Emily now. Morrison & Associates is headed by Richard Morrison, who consults with me quarterly on international market trends, I said. The words came easily now, each one a small revelation, a tiny bomb detonating in the carefully constructed hierarchy they'd built with me at the bottom. He values my analysis because I synthesize information from sources most analysts miss. I read financial reports in 4 languages, track emerging markets that don't show up on most radar screens, and identify patterns that MBA graduates often overlook because they're too busy relying on conventional wisdom. I stood up, crossing to the window, looking out at the garden I'd designed, the home I'd helped build. Mr. Morrison and I have a standing arrangement. Twice a year, I send him my market predictions and strategic recommendations. In return, he's offered me a permanent consulting position at any time I choose to accept it. Emily sank back onto the sofa. Why didn't you ever say anything? I turned to look at her, this young woman who'd spent years treating me like I was invisible, like my lack of degree made me worthless. Would you have listened, or would you have found some way to diminish it, to explain why my achievements didn't really count because I didn't earn them in the way you thought was proper? She didn't answer. She didn't need to. We both knew the truth. Mrs. Carter's voice came out thin, reedy. But you always acted so humble, I supplied, quiet, content to stay in the background. I moved back to my seat, settling into it with a grace I'd never quite allowed myself before. I did that because I loved David, and I didn't want to create family drama, because I know how much his relationship with his brother means to him, because I was raised to believe that actions matter more than recognition. But all this time, Mr. Carter said slowly, his face reddening, all these years, we've said things. You've said many things, I agreed. You've called me an uneducated housewife. You've suggested I married above my station. You've implied that David settled for someone beneath him. You've made jokes at dinner parties about my community college dropout status. You've praised Emily's ambition and drive while carefully avoiding any acknowledgement of Sophie's accomplishments, presumably because she learned from me. Sophie's eyes were bright with tears, but she was smiling fiercely. And through all of it, I continued, I said nothing. Because I thought you deserved the dignity of your ignorance. I thought it was kinder to let you believe your narrative than to humiliate you with the truth. But today, Listening to Emily dismiss me, watching her treat the idea of my help as a joke, I realized that my silence wasn't kindness, it was enabling cruelty. Emily's voice came out barely above a whisper. I didn't know. No, I said. You didn't, but you also didn't ask. You saw a woman without a degree and decided that meant she was without value. You looked at your aunt and saw only what you expected to see. Someone simple, someone limited, someone who couldn't possibly understand your complex, important world. Mrs. Carter stood abruptly, her designer handbag clutched to her chest like a shield. This is quite a lot to process. Perhaps we should sit down, David said. His voice was quiet but firm, carrying an authority I rarely heard him use with his brother's family. You came here to ask Lisa for help, even if you didn't realize that's what you were doing. The least you can do is hear her out. Mrs. Carter sat. I looked at Emily, really looked at her, and saw beneath the arrogance to the frightened girl underneath. She was 20 years old, desperate to prove herself, terrified of failing, and she'd learned from her parents that the way to feel secure was to put others down. I'll make you a deal, I said. I'll introduce you to Richard Morrison. I'll provide a recommendation that will guarantee you serious consideration for that internship. I'll coach you through the interview process and give you the kind of insider knowledge that you can't get from textbooks or career counselors. Emily leaned forward, hope and shame warring on her face. Really? Even after everything But, I cut her off, my voice hardening just slightly, you need to understand something first. Intelligence doesn't require a degree. Worth doesn't come from credentials, and the people you dismiss as unsophisticated or uneducated might be the same people holding up the world around you while you're too busy looking down to notice. I turned to Mr. and Mrs. Carter, and you two need to decide whether you want a relationship with me based on respect, or whether you'd prefer to continue as we have been, with me managing things quietly in the background while you pretend I don't exist. Because I'm done playing small to make you comfortable. The silence stretched out, thick and heavy. David reached over and took my hand, squeezing it gently. Sophie was watching me with an expression of absolute pride. Finally, Mr. Carter spoke, his voice rough with something that might have been shame. I think we owe you an apology, Lisa. Several years' worth of apologies, actually. I don't need apologies, I said. I need changed behavior. I need to be treated like a member of this family instead of like staff. I need Emily to understand that arrogance is not the same as confidence, and that the people she steps on while climbing her ladder might be the same people she needs when she falls. Mrs. Carter's eyes were wet. She looked older suddenly, smaller. We've been terrible to you. Yes, I agreed, because there was no point in false modesty now. You have been, but people can change. The question is whether you want to. Emily stood up and crossed the room to stand in front of me. Up close, I could see that she'd been crying, her carefully applied makeup running slightly at the corners of her eyes. I'm sorry, Aunt Lisa, I'm so sorry. I've been such a snob. And you're right. I did look down on you. I did think your lack of degree meant you couldn't possibly understand my world. And now? I asked. Now I'm wondering what else I've been wrong about. She laughed, but it was a broken sound. All this time I've been so proud of getting into Whitman, so sure it proved I was special, and it turns out I wouldn't even be there if you hadn't helped me. God, I'm mortified. Good, Sophie said from across the room. Her voice was sharp but not unkind. Mortification builds character. Maybe you'll think twice before dismissing someone based on their resume. Emily turned to look at her cousin. I've been awful to you too, haven't I? Made all those comments about state school versus private university. You really have, Sophie said. But then she smiled. Just a little. But I figure if Mum can forgive you for years of snobbery, I can probably manage to get past a few stupid comments about my school. I stood up, facing all of them. This family that had tried so hard to put me in a box, to make me smaller so they could feel larger. "Here's what's going to happen," I said. "Emily, I'll help you with Morrison and Associates, but in return, you're going to volunteer 10 hours a week tutoring underprivileged kids who want to go to college but don't have the resources or connections. You're going to learn that intelligence and drive exist outside the walls of prestigious universities." Emily nodded, her throat working. "Okay, yes, I'll do that." I turned to the Carters. "And you two are going to stop making decisions about this family based on whose credentials sound most impressive. David and I are partners in every sense of the word. When you want to discuss business or investments or family planning, you include me. Not because I demand recognition, but because mutual respect is the foundation of family relationships." Mr. Carter and Mrs. Carter exchanged a long look. Then Mr. Carter stood, walked over to me, and extended his hand. "You have my word, Lisa. Things are going to change." I shook his hand, feeling the calluses from his golf grip, the expensive watch cold against my wrist. "Good." Mrs. Carter rose and crossed to me, and to my surprise, she pulled me into an embrace. "I've been so foolish," she whispered against my shoulder, "so caught up in appearances and prestige that I couldn't see what really mattered. Can you forgive us?" I pulled back to look at her. "I can try. But forgiveness isn't automatic and it isn't immediate. You've made me feel small and worthless for years. That doesn't go away with one apology. It goes away with consistent, genuine change." She nodded, wiping at her eyes. "Fair enough. More than fair." The conversation continued for another hour, awkward and halting at times, but more honest than any interaction we'd had in a decade. Emily asked question after question about my work, about how I'd learned what I knew, and I could see her genuinely trying to understand. The Carters listened as David talked about the business decisions we made together, the way we'd built our life through partnership and mutual support. When they finally left, Emily hung back for a moment at the door. "Aunt Lisa, thank you for not giving up on me even though I gave you every reason to." "You're young," I said. "You're allowed to be stupid while you're young. The key is to learn from it." She smiled, and for the first time it looked genuine. "I'll try to remember that." After they'd gone, Sophie threw her arms around me. "Mum, that was amazing. I can't believe you've been hiding all of that for so long." "I wasn't hiding," I said, holding her close. "I was just being myself. The problem was that they refused to see me." David wrapped his arms around both of us. "I should have said something years ago. Should have made them respect you." "You couldn't make them do anything," I said. "Respect has to be earned and given freely. It doesn't count if it's forced." We stood there in the fading afternoon light, the three of us, and I felt something settle in my chest. For years I'd carried the weight of their disdain, let it make me question my own worth even though I knew better. I'd made myself smaller, quieter, less visible, all in the name of family harmony. But harmony built on dismissal and disrespect isn't harmony at all. It's just silence masquerading as peace. Sophie pulled back to look at me. You know what my favourite part was? When Emily's face went completely white and she realised that all her Whitman glory was actually because of you. I laughed, surprised by the sound. That wasn't the point. "Maybe not," Sophie said, grinning, "but it was still extremely satisfying." David squeezed my shoulder. "What made you finally decide to tell them? After all this time?" I thought about it, trying to pinpoint the exact moment when my patience had transformed into resolve. I think it was watching Emily mock the very idea that I could help her. Not just dismiss me, she's been doing that for years, but laugh at the suggestion, like it was the most ridiculous thing she'd ever heard. I moved to the window, watching the sun set over the garden, and I realised that if I let this continue, I'd be teaching Sophie that it's okay to accept disrespect. That women should stay quiet and humble, even when they're the ones holding everything together. I don't want that for her. I don't want that for myself anymore. Sophie came to stand beside me. For what it's worth, I always knew you were brilliant, even when they couldn't see it. I know, baby. I put my arm around her shoulders. You've always seen me clearly. The phone rang, and David answered it. I watched his expression change as he listened. Then he held the phone out to me. It's Richard Morrison. I took the phone, curious. Richard, what can I do for you? Lisa, I just got an interesting call from Emily Carter, your niece, I believe. His voice carried amusement. She said you'd suggested she contact me about an internship, but she wanted to make sure I knew that she understood it would be based on her own merit. Not family connections. She was quite insistent about it. Said you'd taught her something about humility and working for what you want. I smiled. Did she now? She did. And then she asked if, instead of an internship, I might know of any volunteer programs where she could tutor disadvantaged students interested in business. Said she had a lot to learn about the real world. He paused. What did you say to that girl, Lisa? Just the truth, I said. Sometimes that's all it takes. After I hung up, David looked at me with that expression I'd fallen in love with 30 years ago. Admiration mixed with wonder, as if he still couldn't quite believe his luck. You could have destroyed them today. You had every right to. But instead you gave them a chance to be better. I didn't do it for them, I said honestly. I did it for me. Because I'm tired of letting other people's limitations define how I see myself. And I did it for Sophie, so she knows that strength doesn't require cruelty. Sophie hugged me again, fierce and tight. I'm so proud to be your daughter. The feeling is entirely mutual. That night, lying in bed beside David, I thought about all the years I'd spent letting the Carters underestimate me. Part of me wondered if I should feel angry about the wasted time, the unnecessary humiliation, the countless small cuts of their dismissal. But I didn't feel angry. I felt free, because the truth was their opinion of me had never actually diminished my worth. I'd always known what I was capable of. I'd always understood my own value. Their blindness had been their problem, not mine. The only thing that had changed today was that I'd stopped protecting them from the consequences of their own prejudice. I'd stopped making myself smaller so they could feel bigger. I'd stopped accepting the role they'd assigned me and shown them who I really was. And the really beautiful part? I'd done it without malice, without revenge. I'd simply told the truth and let them decide what to do with it. David's arm tightened around me in the dark. What are you thinking about? I'm thinking about Sophie, I said. About how she's always going to remember this day, the day her mother stopped apologizing for taking up space. Good, he murmured against my hair. That's a good lesson to remember. I closed my eyes and felt myself drift towards sleep, peaceful and content. Tomorrow, Emily would start her volunteer work. The Carters would begin the long process of learning to see me clearly. Sophie would continue building her own path, armed with the knowledge that her worth was inherent, not granted by others' approval. And I would continue doing what I'd always done, learning, growing, building, creating, but now without the weight of their disdain pressing down on my shoulders. Because that was the real lesson in all of this. You can't force people to see you. You can only refuse to unsee yourself. And I was done being invisible.